Hi, I'm Larry Magid, CEO of Connect Safely, and I'm happy to be with Samir Hinduja, a professor in the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice at Florida Atlantic University, co director of the Cyberbullying Research Center, and faculty associate at the Berkman Center at Harvard University. Samir has been an active leader in the field of cyberbullying for many years now, and my go to guy, or at least one of my main go to people, when it comes to anything to do with cyberbullying, harassment, or the way young people are treated online. So, to begin with, Samir, thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure, Larry. It's good to see you.
Good to see you. So, your organization does a lot of research and I know pays attention to other research. So, talk about the latest research on cyberbullying. What does it suggest? Is it more prevalent among real life peers or in anonymous spaces like online services?
Great question. So, with my colleague, Dr. Justin Passion, who's over at the University of Wisconsin Eau Claire, we really do try to keep our finger on the proverbial pulse of what's going on amongst youth, especially online. And so, when it comes to cyberbullying, we collected new data earlier this year. And to be honest, we did see a bit of an uptick as compared to our last round of national data. So, back in 2019, we saw that it was about 17% of youth had been cyberbullied in the last month. Whereas this year, we found that it's about 23%, 24% of youth. So, again, approaching one out of four youth between the ages of 13 and 17 have been cyberbullied in the last month. This could be for a number of reasons. We know without a doubt that with COVID and quarantine, many youth are just in front of their screens so much more. And so it's very possible that they're then exposed to a little bit more harm. Could be for some other social or cultural reasons as well. And then, secondly, with regard to the context, what we're seeing is that cyberbullying is primarily a phenomenon involving peers and peers from school largely. It tends not to be about stranger danger. What we do see, and perhaps we'll chat about this, is that various forms of hate speech and hate crime, those tend to be involving strangers, someone that you might see or find on the internet. Whereas, again, when it comes to youth based cyberbullying, it's really tends to be someone you know from school.
So we hear a lot about bystanders and upstanders, an upstander, of course, being somebody who tries to really help the situation, not just observe it. But how hard is it for young people to be an ally when they see peers or strangers being targeted?
It's very difficult for youth to speak up, much like it was probably difficult for you and for me when we were growing up. The tendency is for us to just want to mind our own business and keep our head down because we're already struggling with so many difficulties in terms of adolescence. It's rough growing up. And so we don't want to get involved many times, even though we could point out and say that was unjust or that was hateful. And we do feel prompted to step in some capacity, but many youth will readily admit that in the moment, they freeze, they feel paralyzed, and they don't know exactly what to do. So it's challenging. And I think the first takeaway is for us to remember that we have to come alongside youth. And yes, we want them to step up, we want them to be upstanders, but let us remember that it was difficult for us when we were growing up too. Whereas maybe right now as adults, it's not so difficult. And then secondly, I think it's very important for us to be intentional about equipping them with an action plan so that they know what to do in that moment. So instead of freezing, they actually think to themselves, okay, we've discussed this or we've worked through a role playing scenario and I know that I should do this or that.
We talked to parents ahead of this interview and asked them what are their top questions. And one mom said, "How do I find out if my daughter is being cyberbullied?" Bullied. She said that she shuts down when I bring it up. Any advice to that mom?
I think that's a story we hear often. Many youth continue to be very hesitant to speak to their parents or guardians related to issues that they're experiencing on technology. And we've heard the reasons. It's because they're wondering if you're going to take away their phone or ban the use of this app or that app or convey blame, whether it's through your words or even through your body language, which of course they pick up on very quickly. And then yes, they put up walls, they shut down. And so ideally, over the course of months and years, you've developed a healthy and open and candid line of communication with your child. And of course, it's not too late to start today. But when you start, make sure that you're non-judgmental and you convey that I'm not going to blame you. I just want to know what's going on, and I will do all that I can to, of course, not make the situation worse for you. Let's just talk this through and figure out if we can come up with some sort of mutually agreeable solution or action plan. If again you're dealing with something unpleasant or problematic online, but just know that I'm in a position of power where I can assist you, and you want to get out of this mess, right? You don't want to just struggle silently. So please open up to me a little bit. Trust that I'm going to come through for you. Give me a chance, and we'll see what we can do.
Another parent we spoke with said that he found out that his son's friends is being bullied at school and online, which is, I understand, quite common that they go together. And he wanted to know if he should tell the other child's parents and how his son could best help and support his friend.
That's also a great question. I think that if you're a parent, you definitely want to know what's going on in the life of your child because oftentimes you're in the dark. And so, if there's another parent who catches wind of some victimization or harm that's taking place, I mean, yeah, you would hope that they would reach out to you. You would want to know, even though, again, you're wondering, what will that look like? And will there be blame cast? And will my family be viewed in a negative light? No, you just want to know what's going on. And so, when it comes to the child, you would hope that that child would be an encouragement to the child who's being targeted. And that could be simple. It could be sending them a complimentary message or doing something kind or just letting them know in some indirect or direct way that, look, you're not alone. I feel you. I understand this struggle. I've dealt with it myself. And just know that if you ever want to talk about it or if you want me to help in some regard, you can come to me. That's what friends should do. That's what classmates should do.
And how do you do that without being threatening or, to make this possibly make the student want to shut down?
I think it's just important to convey that you've been through the same sort of situations. You know what it's like. Identifying some sort of common ground will help disarm the other person, and that might lead to a better outcome.
And earlier you mentioned identity-based harassment. I wonder if you describe what that is and what your research is saying about its increase, and also what parents can do to support their child if they're experiencing that.
We define cyberbullying as willful and repeated harm inflicted through the use of technology. But when it comes to hate based online offenses, we're looking at various sorts of actions that are aggressive, which are targeting individuals based on their identity, based on some characteristic about themselves that they cannot change. And that brings to mind their race, their religion, their sexual identity, their sexual orientation, these sorts of disability, for example, these sorts of characteristics that everyone tends to be somewhat sensitive about. Thankfully, we are seeing that more and more schools are caring deeply about this, and they should, because, of course, there have been many lawsuits where students have been targeted based on their race or some other protected characteristic. And if the school is identified as negligent, well, then there's incredible reputational and financial damage to that school or to the school district. So that is motivating them to care more about this. But we absolutely want all parents to have this discussion with their children and say, look, this is a big deal. It's not small. It's not insults or name calling. It could be considered in many jurisdictions a hate crime. It's very serious. And we want you to know that you've done nothing to warrant this. And so let's work together to figure out a solution so that it stops. It must stop because if it doesn't stop, then more and more in society, we will see this sorts of intolerable behavior being condoned, being laughed about. And that, of course, is going to breed more online hate, which then leads to offline violence against these protected groups.
One other question I'd like to ask you about has to do with sort of what's called norms research. The idea that we need to understand what is normal behavior, which as opposed to what's sort of outlier behavior. And there has been a lot of talk about cyberbullying being an epidemic. It's happening everywhere. Could you put it into a perspective and give parents a sense as to how most kids are behaving and how most kids are interacting with their peers?
I love that point. And so thank you for bringing it up, Larry. Whenever I speak to students at schools, give assemblies or trainings, I always go through the various apps and platforms that they're on, but I'm very focused on conveying to them that the vast majority of youth in this middle school or high school or in the city, in the state, in this country, they're actually doing the right things online. They're being relatively respectful, responsible, and at least neutral. They're not trolling or rage quitting or causing all sorts of issues. But when you see the media labeling cyberbullying as an epidemic, well, then everyone assumes that this is just normative adolescent behavior. It's just what kids are doing these days, which is totally not true. And unfortunately will lead to copycat behavior, the contagion effect, where everyone thinks again, yeah, this is normative. And so what we need to do is continue to reinforce to youth. If any of you have any platform with youth, please bring this up. Convey to them that look, the vast majority of youth are doing the right thing. They understand that technology use and social media use, it is a privilege and not a right. And they understand the responsibilities that go along with that. And yes, there's always going to be a small proportion which misuses the technology, but we're going to do all that we can to continually try to get them on board with the rest of us because that's what leads to a thriving school. That's what leads to a healthy community, and that's what we're all about.
Samir, as you can tell by my gray hair, I'm a baby boomer, and my parents and their peers worried a lot about my generation, but most of us came out okay. And I think my parents' generation parents were worried about the jitterbug or something. But today there's all this talk about Gen Z, narcissism, meanness, you name it. You work a lot with young people. What's your sense of this generation?
I'm very optimistic about Gen Z, and it's easy to just sort of swallow headlines and sound bites because they might align with what we're thinking or what we want to think about this generation, which is very discouraging because I think that we should be more hopeful and feel agency to assist and equip and empower the youth under our care. But I find so many youth who are doing really epic and meaningful things online, really using social media in order to raise awareness involving social justice issues or to speak out about harassment and hate, raising money for various causes that are dear to their hearts. There's a lot of good being done, and there's a lot of skill sets which are being augmented because of social media, because of technology. And those skills, those tools in their toolbox that they're continuing to develop and refine, they're going to greatly benefit them as we move deeper and deeper into this information based society and economy. So instead of being naysayers and critics, let's be their fans, let's be their cheerleaders and figure out what our role is to help them succeed as the next generation.
That's a great way to end our discussion. Dr. Samir Hinduja, professor of criminology and co director of the Cyberbullying Research Center, thank you so much.
It was a pleasure.